the femicide myth in South Africa, the femicide myth. I've already done a video about this, but I didn't present it in this particular fashion. But I just felt that let me answer this thing in a manner that is to say that is scientific. That is something that people who are scientifically minded, who are able to work with data, are able to follow it. And answer this question. It has been said that there is a femicide crisis in South Africa. And the question is that, is this true? Is this true? And the answer is no. There is no femicide in South Africa. Okay, but in terms of us to go down that path, we need to first define terms, definitions. What is femicide? Femicide is a killing of a woman or a girl by a man, in particular by a man, on account of her gender. That's an important thing. That's an important distinction. On account of her gender. Let me use an example about a war-torn place like Ukraine. I'm sure many women have died in Ukraine ever since this war started. Obviously, more men have died there than women. I'll say even 90% of the fatalities in Ukraine are men. More than 90%. But it is, no one can accuse Russia of committing femicide in Ukraine. Because they are not committing femicide. They are killing Ukrainians. They are not killing women in Ukraine on account of their gender. They are killing Ukrainians. In fact, there is more a case of men being killed on account of their gender by the Ukrainian government, which forces men to fight in a war but allows women to leave. But that's a topic for another day. So I'm just using that example. That just because there's a large number of people dying of a particular group doesn't necessarily mean that they are killed because of the fact that they are part of that group. So then let's look at it in South Africa then. How would we establish whether there's a femicide in South Africa or not? One way of doing this is the same way that I use in debunking the myth that Afrikaners are being killed on account of their race. We know that's not true. We know that's a myth. And funny enough, women in South Africa understand this concept when you're explaining it in relation to Afrikaners. But when you're explaining it in relation to them, all of a sudden, their brains short circuit. They're not able to understand this, how data needs to be analyzed to get to the bottom line of causality. Because in order for us to say that there's a femicide, we need to attribute the causality element of on account of their race or on account of their gender, which is not the case. So, but in order for me to establish this, I need to first establish a control data set. Why do we need a control data set? We need a control data set because a control data set allows us to eliminate false positives and false negatives. I'm just going to leave it at the most very entry level in terms of the language that is used in statistics. Control data sets are essential in establishing causality because they provide a baseline for comparison and to help us isolate the effect of the independent variable by minimization the influence of confounding variables. I'm not going to go into all of that, which is a mouthful in terms of the statistics language. But the important thing here about a data set is that a data set or a data group or a control group is used to eliminate false positives and false negatives. It's used to eliminate also logical fallacies, like for instance the fallacy of saying with this therefore because of this, of assuming that okay, men are killing women in South Africa, therefore women are being killed because of gender. That is a very common logical fallacy. And so one of the reasons why you need a control group is to eliminate a fallacy of that nature. So what is our data? What is our control group here? Our control group is to find out how many men in South Africa are killed by other men. That is our data, our control group. Our control group shows that, for instance, men in South Africa make up the overwhelming majority of murder victims. One study showed that 87% of homicide victims in South Africa were men. It actually shows that men are 7 times as likely to be murdered in South Africa than are women. And when you're looking at a particular age group of men, you find that among young adults, male homicide rates were up to 8.4 times higher than female rates. And we know that the overwhelming majority, obviously, of murder suspects or perpetrators in South Africa is men. This obviously has established for us the control set that we need. Okay, now firstly we know that only 23% of murder victims in South Africa are women. Men make up 87% of murder victims. And now what is more is that in both of these sets, over 95% of the perpetrators are men. That is what is called a control set, which eliminates the assumption that women are being called on account of their gender. Because if they were killed on account for their gender, women who are killed by men would be disproportionately higher than men who are killed by men. And that's not the case. And I know that sometimes when we raise the issue that more men are killed in South Africa, 80% of the murder victims in South Africa are men. Many of the people who come with this femicide delusion say to us, but who is killing them? Yes, they are being killed by men. And your question actually makes our argument for us that since these men are being killed by men, it tells us that these female victims are not victims because they are women. Do you follow the logic? They are victims of violence. They are not victims of gender-based violence. Hence, the femicide claim is a myth. It's an absolute myth. Because if they were victims because of their gender, in a country which is 55% women and 45% men, more than 55% of murder victims would be women. We will have a number of or at the very least, we will have a number that is of female murder victims being higher than the number of male murder victims, if gender was an equation in these crimes. But the numbers are so disproportionately showing that it's men who are being affected that it totally removes the assumption that gender has anything to do with it. In fact, these numbers are so overwhelming that they show us that something else is going on here which they have refused to look into. But because claims of femicide and all that are catchy, you can cover it wall to wall, you can feel all important, gender equity and all that bullshit. No one is interested actually in getting to the bottom of the data. It's the same logic. It's the same logic that we use to disprove that white Afrikaners are not being killed on account of their race. It's the same logic. And it's the same logic that they understand when we use it in terms of the women. They understand it very well. Because the disproportionate nature in terms of how many black people in South Africa are killed by other black people compared to how fewer white people die in the hands of black people vis-a-vis their population group percentage in the population of South Africa. The numbers are overwhelmingly clear that the killing of white Afrikaners is not race-related. It is that same logic that we're applying here. So it's been many years we've been bamboozled, being told that we have a femicide crisis in South Africa. No, we do not. There is no femicide crisis in South Africa. There is a violence crisis in South Africa. There's a violence crisis in South Africa. It is not gender specific. If anything, the only group that can really say that they are being targeted by violence in South Africa is young men between the ages of 18 and 30 who have the highest number of murder victims in South Africa, of any group. Of any group. To the point of disproportionately higher than what their population proportion is in South Africa. If anyone had the right to complain about being targeted by murderers in South Africa, it would be young men between the ages of 18 and 30. That is the group that can say, and in this particular instance, it is black young men. So I'm sorry to put it to you, but there is no femicide in South Africa. There's absolutely no femicide in South Africa. And I must go back to definition. In order for it to be a femicide, they have to be killed on account of their gender. And the data that we use using a control set of men as homicide victims overwhelmingly dispels that women are killed in South Africa on account of gender. Overwhelmingly so. And then what tends to happen once we had this conversation on terms of numbers and statistics, and then the people who were arguing before that these people are targeted based on gender or based on race, then they stop making that argument and then they say, but it's still bad that there's so much violence. But there are people, they are being killed and all of that. You see now there's a different argument now. Because now since they can't win the argument that they were making initially of femicide, now they have to move the goalpost of saying, you're showing the data that they're not killed on the account of gender or race. undermines the fact that these are human beings who are being killed. That is some of the most dishonest kind of arguing that I've ever faced. And we face that kind of arguing all the time. Because our initial starting point was not, is there a violence problem in South Africa? Which my answer will be a resounding yes. The initial starting point was not that, is this violence problem affecting people, real families? Should we be concerned about it? That was not the starting point. The starting point was that you are making a claim of femicide, and I'm dispelling and I'm debunking the femicide claim. So I just want to make that point because I know that these people like to move goalposts once their arguments fail. It's the same. It's the same arguments like I've always had with these Black Lives Matter people who making outlandish claims, and then when you dispelling them using data, statistics of police shootings in the US, and then once their arguments inevitably fail on account of stats and numbers, then they go back to the humanity side of, no, but these are human beings. One person killed by the cops is one too many. Yes, I think we can agree with that. But that's not the conversation we were having now, were we? The conversation we were having is that you were saying that black men are being targeted by the police. That's what you were saying, and I was responding to that claim. And the problem, I think what I realized, a lot of people are just dishonest motherfuckers. That's what I've realized. A lot of people are just dishonest. Dishonest, and slimy, and just, it really upsets me. It really upset me. Because if the claim was, if it's besides the point whether this is a race-based attack or whether this is a race-based attack, why do you make the argument? Why do you make the argument? Why don't you limit the argument on the issue of violence? Then we can all come together and deal with the issue of violence. But no, you are not making the point about violence. You are making a point about someone being targeted based on certain protected attributes like race and gender. Those are the points that you are making. And then when we dispel those points, and then you start beatboxing and start moving around, dancing and doing all kinds of things. That's when I realized, these people are just being dishonest. Yeah, so I'm saying this because I expect that some moron will watch my video and then say, but they are human beings, but they are being killed, but. Yes, they are. Many people are dying in South Africa. And gender has nothing to do with it. Race has nothing to do with it. Something else is going on altogether. And a lot of it is personal squabbles and personal disagreements. And yes, some of those personal squabbles are unique between men and women, but they are still personal squabbles. And these personal squabbles, it's not gender also, because men also kill each other based on personal squabbles. And you are not saying that these men are killing these men because they hate men, but you are saying that men are killing women because they hate women. And you have no data to support that point. Nothing. Zilch. And personally, I'm sick of it. I'm absolutely sick of it. There's no femicide in South Africa. Absolutely none. Cheers.